Hello and welcome to Planted Nutrition. My name is Luke, I'm a nutritionist, and in this video we're talking about everything you need to know about vitamin B12. So vitamin B12, also known as cobalamin, probably pronounce it differently depending on where you're from, but it's a vital nutrient that plays a key role in many essential aspects of our health, including DNA synthesis, red blood cell formation, and neurological function, the health of our nervous system. It's incredibly important. And despite this importance, B12 deficiency is relatively common, and it can lead to serious health issues if left untreated. In this video, we're going to go over everything you need to know about B12, including its benefits, its risks associated with deficiency, everything you need to know about supplementation, blood tests, finding out your levels, and more. So let's get into it. So we touched on the importance of B12, and it's a unique vitamin because unlike most vitamins, it is generally only found in animal products. It's also a really big molecule compared to the size of other vitamins, which can make it a bit harder for our body to absorb as well. And we also only need tiny amounts, only a couple of micrograms per day. And a microgram is 1/1000th of a milligram, which is 1/1000th of a gram. So we're talking like microscopic amounts here. And so B12 is important for lots of aspects of our health: red blood cell formation, our bone health, our brain health and cognitive function, prevention of birth defects, as well as our mood and mental health. And some of the risks and symptoms of B12 deficiency: there's certain conditions like pernicious anemia, which is lack of red blood cell production from the lack of B12, which kind of contributes to fatigue and weakness. There can also be neurological changes such as tingling in the hands or feet, memory loss, or difficulty maintaining balance, and this relates to its effects on our nervous system. And low levels of B12 can also contribute to elevated levels of homocysteine, which is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. And some studies have found that vegetarians that are low in B12 and who have higher levels of homocysteine, they found that that could potentially negate the other cardiovascular benefits of vegetarian diets. So if you are eating a vegan or vegetarian diet, it is really important to supplement B12. And we'll be getting into recommended dosages later on in the video, so make sure you stick around for that. So common questions about vitamin B12. Number one, is B12 supplementation necessary for everyone? So not necessarily. Generally in younger healthy people, it is not necessary. If you're eating an omnivorous diet with animal products, you're probably getting enough. However, as we said, vegetarians, vegans, and also older people generally want to probably look into supplementation because as we're older, we absorb it less well. Number two, if I'm supplementing B12, can too much cause harm? Generally, no. It's considered safe even at higher doses because it's a water-soluble vitamin. Our body can excrete excess. There are certain things that might aggravate, like acne, for example, in certain individuals. So ideally, we want to be taking the right dose and not too much. Also, we just don't want to be wasting our money on taking too much of a certain vitamin. So let's get into it. Vitamin B12 dosage recommendations. So the recommended daily intake for vitamin B12 is 2.4 micrograms per day. This is a tiny amount, and people who are eating a broad omnivorous diet are probably getting enough, as we've said. But for those who are vegetarian or vegan like me, I'm taking my B12 supplements. And how much should you take? Generally about 25 to 250 micrograms per day. And the reason we take more than the recommended daily intake is because we don't absorb all of the supplement that we take. So we actually need to take a much bigger dose in order to get that necessary amount that we need. And so my recommendations for that, most supplements that you find probably have about 50 micrograms, which is great. And you would take that each day, or you can get ones that you take once a week as well. And that's a much higher dose because again, we don't absorb all of it. And so that would be about 2,000 to 2,500 micrograms once per week. It's going to depend on what sort of person you are, but I generally recommend the one that you take every day just because then you're in the habit of taking it every day. It's easier to remember. But if you easily remember each week to take your B12, that's great. And you can always do things like set in a repeating reminder on your phone each week, for example, to remind you to take your B12, because you certainly don't want to get deficient after you know what can happen. And so older adults might look into supplementing higher doses as well. As I said, it's harder to absorb B12, especially as we get older. And that's something that you'd want to talk with your nutritionist, dietitian, doctor, health professional about. But this gets into the next section of the video, is how do we test our B12 level? Because it's better to know what it is and then work from there. Maybe our B12 level is fine and we can keep doing what we're doing, or maybe our B12 level is low and we do need to make some changes. So there's several different tests we can use to assess B12 levels. The most common one is just a serum B12 test. This is part of a normal blood test, and it measures the amount of B12 in your blood. And this is generally okay. It's not the most accurate test, but because there's multiple forms of B12 in our body and not necessarily all of them are usable by our body, so there can be a bit of inaccuracy here, but it's generally the cheapest and most available, so if that's all you have, go for that. The normal range will depend on your country and your lab test provider, but it's generally about between 200 to 900 micrograms per liter, and levels between about 200 to 350 are borderline low, so you probably would like to look at supplementing to get yourself to a higher level, and that's something that you'd want, again, to discuss with your healthcare provider. The next test you can do is the methylmalonic acid test, or MMA test. Methylmalonic acid levels in the blood and the urine decrease when B12 is deficient. So this test is good for picking up deficiency early before it progresses, even when our B12 levels might be showing in the normal range in the serum B12 test, for example. The third one is the homocysteine test. As we've touched on earlier in the video, elevated homocysteine levels are a symptom of B12 deficiency, and this test is often used alongside the MMA test to give more accurate results, to give a more comprehensive view of B12 status. And the final test is holotranscobalamin test, also known as the active B12 test. And this measures the amount of B12 that's actually usable by our body. And this is another more sensitive test compared to the serum B12 test that looks at the total amount of all types of B12 in our blood. And so these other tests, depending on where you are, they may or may not be accessible. Ideally, the MMA test is going to give you kind of the best value for money. It's more accurate than the serum B12 test. But again, as I said, if the serum B12 test is all you have, that's absolutely better than nothing, and it will still give you a general idea of your B12 status. And so from there you can work with a nutritionist, dietitian, doctor to get yourself to a good level. I'm a clinical nutritionist and this is the work that I do with my clients, so if you need help with getting your blood tests or interpreting your lab results and finding a plan to move forward, I offer online consultations which you can book at the link in the description. I'd love to help you out if that's something you need support with. But to put it all together, B12 is an incredibly important nutrient that we probably don't nearly talk about enough. It's important for so many aspects of our health, and deficiency can cause severe health issues. It's very easy and cheap to supplement, and it's definitely essential if you're following like a vegetarian or vegan diet, and can also be helpful for certain other groups like elderly people, for example. There's lots of different tests you can look at to assess your B12 levels, and if you need support, work with a health professional. You don't have to do it all on your own, because I know it can seem so overwhelming and confusing. So get support if you need it. It's really not worth getting deficient in B12 because it can cause serious health issues. I've been Luke from Planted Nutrition. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, feel free to give it a like, as that really helps me out in the YouTube algorithm. See you soon for another video, and until then, stay healthy, my friends.